What is it? Neither one. All right. Religion in the 1950s is going to be important. We talked about duck and cover. Religion's going to be important for a number of reasons. Church attendance increases significantly from the 1940s to the 1950s. Why is that the case? There's several reasons. Anybody got one reason why? Give me one. All right. The atomic age, nuclear weapons scares the crap out of people. They have to take mortality more seriously. Okay, but even then, there's something else that gives them more of a thought process about the afterlife and death. What is it that? What events have made Americans more thoughtful about what happens to them after they die? What events have we just come out of? World War II, the Korean War. People are thinking more about what happens to you after you die. They face death. Many of them start thinking about, why did I make it through this? What does this all mean? So church attendance is going up. People start thinking about their own mortality. Sir, right? Something else that matters too, and this is something that most people didn't know about or were aware of. Religion, Christianity in particular, distinguishes us from the communists because in the Soviet Union, what's the official religion? What's their position on religion, Toby? Atheism. They didn't have one. They were like, we don't believe in religion at all. It's a way to distinguish ourselves. Fun fact, what did they add to the Pledge of Allegiance in the 1950s? The phrase under God. Before the 1950s, the Pledge of Allegiance didn't include the phrase under God. If you get really old folks who grew up in that time period or a little bit before, you can still tell because when they say the pledge, they automatically omit the phrase under God because that's what they were doing throughout their entire academic career. And then they're like, by the way, we're adding a phrase in here. What did we start printing on all of our money? In God we trust. We want to distinguish ourselves from the communists. Those commies. All right, so religion's a big deal because one, we're starting to question our own mortality. All right. Two, we got to distinguish ourselves from the communists. There's another major reason too. Okay. What do people start seeing their children doing? What are they fearful of in terms of the world influence? What becomes popular that young people love and old people hate? Music, rock music, and some of the literature. They're like, hey, popular culture is hurting our kids. It's the work of the devil. You ever heard that? The devil's music. All right. Ultimately, they're like, look, religion's important because we have to contradict the culture of our era that says that this is okay. We don't want our kids questioning authority. We want them to obey and do as they're told. All right. That's important. We don't like the music. We don't want our kids having sex, drinking alcohol, and doing drugs. Right? We want them to avoid that. Ooh, wow. All right. By the way, can you think of a historical time, something that, at least in my lifetime, what do you think the biggest event was that spurred on church attendance that made people realize maybe I need to focus on what happens after I die? I'll give you a hint this millennium. 9/11 for sure. Church attendance post 9/11, that Sunday afterwards, was like one of the highest attended Sundays ever. Ooh. Now, there's a couple influential figures in religion, especially in the 1950s. One of them we want to mention, this guy, Billy Graham. Have you ever heard of Billy Graham before? He's been dead for about 7 or 8 years. His children still run his ministry, but Billy Graham in the late 40s starts a traveling ministry where they would conduct basically church services, religious services, and from one city to the next. Okay? And there's a reason that Billy Graham's ministry takes off and where he becomes popular. One of them is it's a product of the time. People were hungry for what he was wanting because of what we just mentioned, that People are thinking about their own mortality, et cetera, right? But there's other reasons too. And you're going to see, we'll watch a clip of him here in a second, but Billy Graham really is a person who it's pretty obvious that he believes what he's preaching and he lives it out. Billy Graham, a lot of people were wanting to bring him down and because they were like, well, he's getting very popular and it'd be nice if he was knocked down a peg. And he, for example, anytime Billy Graham, he got so popular that when he would go to stay at a hotel, he had to have somebody go into his room ahead of time because like the paparazzi would be there or people would attempt to like hire a woman to go in and pretend like she was there waiting for him for illicit purposes. So Billy Graham, was somebody that they wanted to see knocked down, but people loved him because he is living out his faith. And he's a guy who also appeals to a broad range of folks. You're going to see he's very anti communist, but at the same time, Billy Graham is one of the first white pastors to jump on board and commend what Martin Luther King Jr. was doing. A lot of white pastors did not want to back Martin Luther King Jr. originally. And Billy Graham is way ahead of the train on that. That he's like, look, you got to stand up to injustice. Right? So Graham is one of the major influences. He starts a traveling ministry, and it's still in operation today. Graham also was so popular that he started advising, like presidents would invite him to the White House, and he would offer them advice about spiritual matters. Or what does this mean? Like, how do I handle this? People like, Dwight Eisenhower, JFK, what do we do in situations like this? Because they look at a pastor for moral leadership. Now, on top of that, Graham also, he became friendly with Queen Elizabeth. He starts eventually taking this ministry worldwide. Okay? Now, as popular as he is, there's another figure at the time that was relatively popular too. If you've ever heard of C.S. Lewis before, C.S. Lewis, most people know him, even if you're not religious. What stories do you know him for? Chronicles of Narnia. Okay? And those are that's an allegory for Christianity, but C.S. Lewis, one of his other books becomes immensely popular. During World War II, he did a series of radio broadcasts for the British, for the BBC. And he's a Brit himself, and he actually gave a series of broadcasts where he explained from a philosophical point of view why he believed Christianity was true. Okay? C.S. Lewis was a famous literature professor, and he was an atheist before he became a Christian. And C.S. Lewis, after the war was over, he took the text from those radio broadcasts and put them into a book. And Mere Christianity has been one of the most popular Christian books in the last 100 years. In fact, a lot of people would tell you, and I would probably tell you too, that C.S. Lewis is probably one of the biggest influences on Christianity for somebody who wasn't a pastor. C.S. Lewis was a literature professor for almost his entire adult life. And he came to believe this. And it was a big deal because you have this guy who's atheist turned Christian, and he's a literary critic and a literature professor. And he's telling people that not only is I think the Bible is real, but I'm going to tell you from a philosophical standpoint why I think it's true also. Mere Christianity is a big hit in both Great Britain and the United States. And so this really pushes people towards religion. Right? Religion you also start to see bleeding over into pop culture some too. In the movies, anybody know what movie this is from? Or even what biblical character this is supposed to be? It's Moses, man. Charlton Heston, a famous actor at the time, plays Moses in the Ten Commandments. It's the story of Moses and how he takes on Pharaoh, and he's parting the Red Sea here. And it's in color at the time, which was a big deal. The animation, their version of CGI that they had in parting the Red Sea was fantastic. You're like, oh my gosh. And then there's one scene where he takes his little staff there and puts it in the Nile River and it turns red. And you're like, oh man, it's 1950s film at its finest. Okay? People are making money off of this because they realize there's a market for it. Pop culture oftentimes looks for, in movies in Hollywood, look for things that people will buy. Okay? Let me show you a little video here of